call it to order, and we'll begin with the roll call.
Committee Member Rangel.
Here.
Committee Member Rickard. Committee Member Seebach.
Here.
Vice Chair Darris.
Here.
Chairperson Bourbeau.
Here.
All present.
Okay, and now we move on to the consent calendar, which consists of the minutes of last week's meeting. Does anybody have any comments or corrections regarding the minutes? And
I move approval as presented.
Well, let's just double check, make sure we have no public comment.
Oh, okay.
I assume we do not, Amanda? Can you confirm we have no public comment?
Unless Grigor wants to say something, no comment.
Okay, so then we have a motion by Treasurer Seebach. Do we have a second for approval of the consent calendar?
Oh, so moved.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Can you go ahead and call the roll for that?
Certainly. Committee Member Rangel.
Yes.
Committee Member Rickard.
Yes.
Committee Member Seebach.
Yes.
Vice Chair Darris.
Yes.
Chairperson Bourbeau.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, our next item is public comment, and this is public comment for any item within the purview of the Finance Committee, but not on today's agenda. Do we have any member of the public that would like to comment, either Grigor Jones or anybody on the phone? Okay, we do not. Then we will close public comment and bring it back to the committee, and we'll move on to our business, which is a review of general fund, part 1 of 2. So Jerry, we will turn it over to you.
Terrific, thank you. Okay, is my screen sharing yet? Oh, there we go. Not working? Okay, super. So yes, we're super excited to move on to the general fund portion of the budget. We've looked at a lot of different components so far, and we reviewed a lot of different information also on the April 27th council report. On that staff report, we reviewed a couple of different lists. We've modified those, and I'll go through those in a moment. Particularly, this first one is looking at items that we would like to use D20 funds for, and then there's some general fund items, and then some categories for funds that we have, other sources of funds that we can use some of these supplementals. So I think we're all familiar with the process. So we go through the budget. We typically will give the departments a certain percentage, like, you know, you're either flat from the prior year, you get a 1%, a 2% increase for your operating expenses, and we build that into their costs. Anything beyond that, or for any particular special items, like for finance, we needed to make a big payment for the prior workers' comp carrier, CCCSIF. It was $157,000. It didn't fit in my operating budget, so I needed to request a supplemental budget allocation for that. Of course, when we went through that process, we had way more requests than we had funds to do that. So we've kind of divided them up and funded those that seem most critical to meeting the strategic priorities of the council. So we've broken those down again here, and then we have some of the budget worksheets for the particular departments that have some of these items in there, and we'll go ahead and go through these, and then we'll go through the remaining general funds next week, and some kind of clean up on a few funds that either we haven't hit or that we need to kind of readdress. So you can see kind of the format of this. This first page is all D20 funding. This is current year funds, so you know that the sales tax measure went into effect April 1st, I'm sorry, of this year. So we have 1 quarter of funding available for the current year, and then the next 2 years in the budget cycle. This one here is for other funds. For instance, like the officers who are being funded out of the D20 money, but we were able to get vehicles and some equipment for them out of one of the impact fees, the impact fee for the law enforcement. So that is an authorized purchase there. And so we were able to kind of maximize our funding options. So I won't go through every single line item here. Unless you prefer that I do, you can kind of maybe holler if you have any questions. The bulk of these were on that report that we brought to council on April 27th. A few of them, like replacing the chainsaws, that came up after that session. We figured that it was a kind of a modest amount. We were able to fit it into the current year's D20. So a couple of those things are popped in here. Otherwise, these are just kind of refined numbers from what was taken to council on that, the 27th.
I have just a quick question, and it's just for clarification since I'm kind of new at this. On the strategy priorities, we have fiscal strategies and public safety and executive city services. I guess that's what that means. So I'm not sure what the difference is. You know, I'm looking at like handheld police radios is not under public safety. It's under the fiscal strategies. And I just want to understand why one, not the other.
Great question. So these, yeah, I know we're trying to cram a lot of words in a little tiny space. So I think that's supposed to say public safety and exemplary city services. So you're right. We're trying to kind of decide which of the priorities fits in. The radios, because it's kind of a long-term plan to fund them and to keep them funded is kind of that financially viable for now and into the future. We put the radios in that fiscal strategy category.
Okay.
And Mark, those are the 5 strategic priorities that we came up with at the February strategic planning session.
Oh, okay.
And then you have the individual actions underneath it that we brought to you on April 27th. Right. And some of those actions, these will tie to some of those actions. As you remember, there was a lot of crossover between all of the different priorities. And so kind of where the action ended up is where that X ended up.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, though, because a member of the public would go, well, wait, how are, police radio replacements and whatever,
yeah,
what does that mean in the context of a fiscal strategy versus, people could understand if it was under public safety
right.
or exemplary services.
Right.
And so, yeah, it kind of a little, I wouldn't say counterintuitive, but for some, it would be, I think for the public, some of it would be more logically under the public safety column.
Well, and what we can do is we can just hide those because under the public safety and exceptional city services, we didn't talk about asset replacement or stuff like that. And so it was really about staffing and some of those other things. So maybe it's just easier to hide these columns, but we wanted to kind of show how we got to, this list is the priority.
Right. So, Jerry, I think this page is a very important page, especially because of the public interest in, okay, what's my city doing with the D20 money? And so this kind of encapsulates it as good as anything would. So to refresh my memory on a couple things, we get 1 quarter's worth of revenue for this year. And I think that was like $1.2 million or something like that. And so we're only spending $826,000 of that in the current year. The ongoing amount of revenue, we've at one of our more recent meetings, you projected it to be a little higher than original based upon the ratio of F-14 money to Bradley Burns revenue. In other words, the ratio of the 0.5% to the regular 1%. But if I recall, was it in the low 5 millions? Was it like 5? Was it as much as these 2 annual expenditures, 5.7 and 5.3, or was it slightly less, or what was the projected revenue?
So I will tell you that the 826 plus the 5.7 equal the 5 quarters. I think the first year, 2021, is 1,285,000, and the second year's 5.2. But we can't spend the 1.2 in time to have it in 2021. So we tried to zero out those two, and by 22, 23, it zeroes out. So the 5,430,000 is what we're projecting the D20 revenue to be that year.
Okay, beautiful. And then, because that's a good explanation, I think some people might ask that, you know, relative to the D20 revenue versus expenditures. On the other funds, you mentioned impact fees. In terms of other funds, I think we had this discussion that some of the additional officer expense can be charged to Mello-Roos, right, to the CFD? Or is it? Or are we applying D20 exclusively?
Right.
Or not D20, impact fees.
Is paying for kind of the ongoing operations for parks and public safety and all that. So that is kind of already paying for those services. The impact fee allows us to use those funds as kind of a one-time purchase to provide for the expansion of our police force. So that the impact fees, which are a more restrictive fund than the CFD, will allow us to do that. We're still using the full CFD for our services. So kind of two separate pieces.
All right, thank you. And like I said, this, I mean, if you had to kind of show the public one thing that says where we're spending the money, it's almost like this page is that representation.
Right, we tried to kind of focus in on all of those so that we can be as transparent and helpful as possible.
Can I make a comment? Well, it seems like some of these are one-time, a lot of these are one-time expenditures, and then some are ongoing. So is your plan to keep segregating the D20 money somehow and report it that way, or the ongoing is just going to fold into the regular general fund budget? Isn't that the case? In other words, once you hire another policeman, then who knows which policeman is the one that came from this money, and from then on, he's part of the general fund.
Right. Rochelle, did you want to respond?
Yeah, that was the whole issue with the D20. We're not going to segregate it. Again, how do you choose which police officer? Is it one that you hire and you follow him in your career? Is it always the youngest? Is it, do you count which car? So that is why we have told the public we're not segregating, you know, the D20 funds, but we're going to tell you generally where we're spending these funds. This is what you're getting for your money. It may not be that police officer, but we're able to add 4 police officers and 1 dispatcher to our existing budget and our existing contingent of people because of D20 funds. So these are the amounts that we're budgeting, and we'll continue to do that with the D20 funds. But we're not going to necessarily, you know, track police officer and, you know, how many bullets did that police officer use in training versus this. I mean, we're not going to go through that exercise of doing that, but we are going through the exercise of looking out. We did make the conscious decision just to mush everything together to make it simpler for people to understand where the money is going. We also have a lot of schedules and pro formas that go out another 5 years, you know, just to make sure that we're not getting ourselves in trouble. Obviously for police officers, we're assuming actually a partial year in year 1, because we couldn't hire 4 police officers tomorrow if we tried. And we're expecting probably young police officers, step A. Those are their salaries are going to grow as they grow in the organization. So you have to make sure that you have enough ongoing, you know, when they get to E-step and some of that. So we do have schedules like that. We just haven't brought those forward here. This is just the combined, simplified overview.
It seems like that.
I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see how, you know, 2 years from now, when we're going through another budget cycle, you know, how, you know, how, what the interest level is, and in terms of people wanting to definitively know where's my D20 money going to. And because, as Jerry noted, that some of these are one-time expenditures, we will have, I suppose, you know, in the future, we'll have more one-time expenditures that are in effect supported by D20 funds. And that's something we'll be able to articulate. But yeah, there's no way we can spend the time and accurately sort out in the future what's, you know, what exactly is supported by D20.
Yeah, that's kind of the point I'm worried about needing one of these schedules every year going out, or every other year going out into the future. And it'll be a nightmare if you try to keep it. I would say maybe have something like $1 million each year from D20 for one-time stuff, and the rest for supporting of ongoing existing operations or something like that. We used to do that, like with federal revenue sharing. You had a hearing every year. What do you want to do with federal revenue sharing? Now it's community development block grants or something, and it's the people get a chance to weigh in on it, but they don't need to know which policeman is, and all that stuff that Rochelle was talking about, which is the nightmare. It's impossible to do it without just arguing your heads off all the time.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of, as you know, Jerry, there's a lot of different ways you can portray something or reflect it in a, you know, in a set of spreadsheets or in a set of books. And I think this is very important for the first 2 years of D20 to demonstrate to the public where it's gone. And that'll become, I guess, increasingly more nuanced in the future.
Yeah, I think this is an important, as you said, Charles, this is a very important page for right now to see what's going on, and I would support all these decisions, not having been in the details of them, but they all have priority in some way, or they wouldn't be on this sheet. So.
Well, if there are no further questions on this sheet, Jerry, I think you can go ahead and go to the next page, the general fund tier 1.
So this is general fund money. So in the event that, you know, there was no D20 money, these would be the types of things that we could fund just with general fund. Well, of course, I guess we'd have to fund things on the previous page, but so this is just regular general fund money. So again, similar to the items that we took on the April 27th staff report, just refined a little bit in dollars to kind of get an exact dollar on these types of figures. It does include the opportunities fund that we talked about at that council meeting too. So that is there as a one-time item for $70,000. And unless you have any questions or point out anything in particular.
So Jerry, I think you might have addressed this in our very first meeting, the supplemental, or maybe in the regular city council meeting, the supplemental requests added up to a lot more than this. These are the ones that essentially are being funded,
right,
with what is essentially is an increase, a generic increase in general fund revenue, right?
Right.
Okay. Curious on number 9, the increased zoo operating costs. That's so that would be what kind of a increase did you give for operating costs to all the other departments?
So we did a 2% overall, and then there were some requests such as this. I think there's one in the fire department that were for particular items, some electrical and public works and zoo as well, where the costs, we just haven't been increasing those items because we've been so tight over the last really since the Great Recession on a lot of these, we have just experienced higher increases in costs than we've been able to manage, and they haven't reached the top of other supplemental lists because those have been very small lately. So some of these, we were able to move things around enough to make it work, but in the majority of these zoos in particular, they're just, the price of animal food is just going up, and we don't really have any options. We need to pay for the animal food. They have done analysis. They've worked with folks at Cal Poly and that sort of thing to kind of dial that in, and they try to, you know, look for good deals and things, but there just are costs on here that that are just going up and just needed to be addressed. It's what we're spending anyways, so it's just whether or not we budgeted at that level.
Right. I was just trying to put it in perspective for myself and maybe others, that the operating costs for that department, if you will, it looks like they're going up more rapidly than the operating costs for other departments.
So I would, yeah, I would definitely say that's not necessarily true. The other departments have received supplementals because they're police and fire, and we all acknowledge that they need it. Mm-hmm. The zoo, we have not. So the zoo has not received supplementals for years and years and years and years. So you're seeing probably 15 to 20 years worth of unacknowledged increases finally being acknowledged.
Got it. No, thank you. And it's a good point, I think, also, because sometimes in a budget cycle like this, it's kind of like, well, this department hasn't had anything for a while, so suddenly, you know, this department gets an increase and nobody else did, and you're looking at, well, why did that department? Well, yeah, I understand. They've
been spending it because they don't really have a choice. They can't say we're not going to feed the animals. Right. You know, we ran out of money. But what we've been doing is pulling from other departments and living with a lot of broken things and doing that to make sure that you can feed the animals and make sure they have their heat lamps and stuff. So.
Got it. Now, and I get it. Like I said, you can have a taking turns effect happening where in any given budget, it looks like you can get a somewhat skewed picture by, you know, who got an increase this year.
Yeah.
Thing. Okay. Thank you for that answer and clarification. Okay. Anybody have any other questions on this page?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's fine, Andrea. That's what you're here for. So go ahead.
Okay. On where it says capital 2021 to 2020, and then current year. Some of it, really the current year, some of that's not capital, like the number item 3 is paying off basically a liability. And so it's just really just one-time things is what that means.
Right.
Is the opportunities fund for the public, or is that for departments to propose some creative thing? I wasn't there for the discussion of that idea. The 70,000.
Yeah, it's actually for the council and for if there are opportunities, if there are things like, hey, if you can match this money, then we can make that money. If there are things where we can get something moved forward quickly by using this as a match, or something, if you take advantage quickly, that is what the intent of that money was for. That's my understanding. Is that, did I capture what you guys said, Mark and Charles?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
It's really just an additional contingencies appropriations, what is. So it doesn't have to be for capital. It's just for one-time stuff.
One-time stuff.
Okay.
Our contingencies are usually used for the fire truck doesn't start or something like that. So.
But didn't you have a little bit of money for businesses and their distressed businesses
we did.
That were in danger of closing down? But that's over with now. It's not in the next year. We're not. No. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay. And I think, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay. So this last one is essentially purchases that are funded, but there's some type of a funding source for them. So general plan update is one of those. We always have said that we were going to use general fund reserves for those. So that kind of falls here. Some of these are in the vehicle fund. We've been putting away for some of this items, some of the things in technology, or we just put away some money in the D20 for the Jaws of Life to replace that. So those types of things are on this page. Again, really similar to our April 27th council meeting.
All looks familiar.
If we decided not to have any wildland fires, could we take that 450 out of there? Pass an ordinance that says no more fires.
Yeah, if you can decide that, I'll pay you $450.
Okay. So what? So then, Jerry, we have detailed departmental budgets to go through, or what's?
So typically we have section E of our budget is all of the kind of operating budgets. So normally those are all of general fund. There's a couple operating stuff in there like the internal service funds and the enterprise funds that we went over last week, the streets fund, that sort of thing. So all of the really where our city operations departments are is all section E. So I pulled a couple of those out just because it's a very large section. And so I pulled a couple of those out that really relate to that list that we just looked at. Other uses, police, fire, I think public works and parks, that grouping, so that we could go over that since we've just gone over the list and kind of demonstrate how things are flowing through the budget. So this is our, what we call our other uses department. So this is something that is kind of a catch-all. It doesn't fit in any particular department, but it kind of catches those citywide type items. So for example, we have the costs for the related to the COVID-19 emergency. We are contributing some funds here, one-time contribution to the technology fund to pay for those laser fish licenses. And then this contribution here for $158,000 to the vehicle and equipment maintenance fund to pay for essentially the backlog of what we should have been putting in up to what we need. So those types of things are flowing through here. And then of course we have an ongoing contribution from the general fund to the streets fund because the gas tax revenue isn't quite high enough to fund that whole department. So that's where we find this transfer. Is there any questions on this particular page?
Ready?
All right. Each section is kind of, I guess I should point that out. There's a description of each section here at the beginning, some goals, objectives, a summary of the costs, and then some performance workload measures here. We do have a few holes here and there. We're still getting a couple of numbers. So as you go through, realize that we are still working on those for the final document.
So Jerry, in each department then, it looks like you kind of have the first page, and then on the second page, you have some performance measurements.
Right.
Workload measurements. This is totally not a budgetary question, but I'm wondering, in terms of we're getting the estimated total calls for service, we had 35,000 in 2018-19, then went down to 32,000, and then this year we're looking at 29,000. This year being an odd year affected by COVID perhaps, but it's just interesting that we're projecting, roughly 30,000 a year, which is substantially less than the number in 18-19.
And I will say we are still kind of refining some of these numbers as well too. So I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at, but these are sometimes complicated numbers to determine in some instances, and I think everybody's still kind of refining those a little bit.
Okay, yeah, and some of them are kind of interesting to read, although I think there must be a typo under the last officer-initiated contacts of 112,000, you know, jumping from by a factor of 10 there. I'm assuming that's either 11,000 something or 12,000 something.
Right. That's pretty significant.
Yeah. I think, though, on the front page of the police budget, you know, it very much, the numbers, you know, going into the $10.6 million range do reflect the substantial increase in the police budget this budget year, these 2 budget years. And that's an important thing to note when people ask, what did you do with the D20 money?
Right.
Okay,
so then in each of the departments too, we kind of break it down by employee services. So all the costs to kind of pay our employees to do those items. And you do see that increase here, as well as we bring on those additional officers and dispatcher, and, you know, kind of the increases as we go out. This also does have some estimate of some salary adjustment pieces in there. So we're still refining those as we go. And then the detail for the operations piece. So this is the piece at the beginning of this process that we told each of the departments, okay, you can have 2% over your prior budget year, and then, you know, try to make that work. So in some instances, they're able to. Police, for example, we have the animal services contract in here, which has been going up significantly. So they had that supplemental that was on that list, and that is kind of buried in this number here. So you will see, or this number here. So you will see some increases. The increases that we talked about with, like, the vehicle replacement fund, where we're putting more in there for the replacement of the police vehicles. You'll see some of those in there as well. And then we have the cost of the new CAD RMS software, some radios, and then some contributions to the vehicle and equipment maintenance fund for repeater and other equipment maintenance in future years. Are there any questions on the police budget? Okay, I will move on. And this part is just a little more of a description of each of those items and kind of what it contains. We have broken up police and then police grants and other programs. We found that it was really difficult because some years we might get like an OTS grant to do DUI enforcement or some other enforcement, and it would spike up the budget and then it would drop back down. And so you would have this weird history. So we felt that if we broke out all of those special grants and programs into a different department or program that was still kind of under the umbrella of the police department, but it was separate. So the police department budget was level over time. And this one kind of goes up and down depending on what budgets, grants, or programs that we have going on. So here's kind of a list of what we have. We do have a couple of OTS grants going on right now. We get some money from the Board of State and Community Corrections. We have that tucked away in a deferred revenue account. So when the police department needs those funds for their assigned purposes, we can recognize some of that revenue. So we do have a little bit of that. So this one will go up and down depending on what our activity is.
I'm sorry, if I could back up another page back or so. The 600,000 for the CAD replacement, that's the computer-aided dispatch, right? Wasn't there talk about some cooperation on dispatch multiple agencies? I don't remember if it was the sheriff or North County. That all fell apart.
Right. I think we took a couple of different looks at those items, and it wasn't going to pan out. It wasn't something that was effective for us. And correct me if I'm wrong, Rochelle, I feel like it was maybe a little bit more expensive and less service to our community.
That was the issue. We were looking at, there were a couple of different options. We've talked to the sheriff before. There's some issues with the sheriff. Sheriff only dispatches police. They don't dispatch police and fire. So we would have had a contract with the sheriff and with CAL FIRE. Both of those agencies are our way or the highway. You have no control or say in costs, level of service, how service is done, and we're significantly more expensive. The cities also gathered together, San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly, Paso Robles, and Atascadero, to look at a joint consolidated dispatch similar to the Santa Cruz model. We looked at that model also. There just wasn't enough savings there to do it. And for some agencies, us and Paso Robles in particular, it would have cost us more. So overall, there wasn't savings, and it just shifted around the cost where it would have been less cost for San Luis, but more for us. And we weren't getting some significantly better service. Obviously, we're going to continue to look at joint dispatch options because no one agency can handle the big calls. It's just really difficult when you're getting, 50 911 calls on an incident going on, and you have one dispatcher there who's also trying to take care of police and fire. So ideally, it would be great to have some sort of joint dispatch. We just have to get the numbers there. It's a challenge.
Okay.
And that software number would include the data migration, which is a pretty big piece of that. So there's a lot of data to be migrated over to the new system and reporting and all that stuff. So.
Hey, and while we're talking back on police too, the numbers for vehicle and equipment operations went up significantly. And Jerry mentioned we bumped up for the actual cost of vehicle replacements. We actually acknowledged that, cars no longer cost $30,000 for police, but it also includes significant equipment replacement for the first time in 25 years to be able to replace a lot of the specialized equipment they have, radio repeaters, AvTech, a lot of stuff in dispatch. So we'll start funding that.
Thank you. Okay. Back to police grants and programs. Unless there's any particular questions here, we can move on. Okay. All right, we will move on to the fire department. So again, we see kind of some growing increases here due to D20 adjustments. And we have similar here with the vehicles and equipment. We're putting away for both of those, as Rochelle indicated, on the police department, and those larger items that we had been postponing funding for a while, the ladder engines and the fire engines, we have reinstated that annual reserve for those. I believe that was in the neighborhood of 144 maybe. So this has gone up significantly and now is covering all of their equipment, rolling equipment, and much of their other day-to-day equipment like the breathing apparatus and the Jaws of Life and those types of things. We also have, let's see, some money in here for the radio replacement like we did in police, and some funds for the fire station rebuild.
So Jerry, the $750,000 requested each budget year for rebuild, to set aside some money for that purpose, that does show as a fire department budget line item. I mean, that's clearly in here, but how would that reflect when, you know, we actually build, let's say we build a $20 million building with some debt financing, that would still reflect as a fire department expense, I assume?
Right, and depending, I mean, in the debt service piece, but depending on if we can do something where we have a public safety operational area versus just the fire department, we could break those out, but yes, it would be fall under the public safety area.
You know, when you do that, obviously that department's budget, you know, looks huge for a couple of, for a particular time period when you do that. Okay.
And the capital, you know, kind of goes up and down with the years. So it's more the kind of the operational budget and the employee services that are more kind of the flat, flatter increase.
And the 750, we're not sure yet what the financing are. We figure 750 a year can get us, we'll just start on designing it and figuring out what we're going to build. But, you know, we were hoping that a debt service of 750,000, if we can get it at 4%, that'll build us about a 17,000 square foot building, which would house dispatch and fire. It would cost more than that if we go with a public safety center. And of course, construction costs are going through the roof, but hopefully we time that right. So I would expect a 750,000 minimum ongoing cost for that. So.
Well, you've got to spend a fair amount of money before you ever get to debt financing.
Yep.
Because the debt, you have to have real plans, real engineering cost estimates, if not bids. So you're a long way from being able to borrow.
That's it.
You're and just that's working on the back of an envelope now. So.
That's it. That's why it shows up as capital outlay, which might confuse people because they go, oh, cool, $1.5 million, we got a new fire station. No, it doesn't work that way.
That would be a good deal.
But it's
new fire station's going to run.
But it's important, you know, to get started on plans.
Yes,
that's what that 750 is going to get you started on plans.
That's exactly.
Gotcha. All right.
And then I'll just point out this one other piece. So again, we're putting some additional kind of one-time funding into the vehicle and equipment fund to kind of be there for future replacement of some of the vital equipment that they use, and tower radio repeaters and that sort of thing.
So that 645,000 will fund a lot of the equipment, all the back amounts owed for equipment for things like turnout, jaws of life, cardiac monitors. They have a whole list of things. This is huge to the fire department that they know that, hey, now that we put this away and we've built the ongoing amount into their budget, that when they need to replace cardiac monitors, the money is there. So this was huge for them.
Got it. Okay.
All right. If there's some more questions on fire, I'll move on to the rest of the fire functions. So again, grants and programs are separated out. And separate from this also is mutual aid. So this does not include the mutual aid piece. We'll get to that in a moment. We do have currently a SAFER grant. That's a FEMA grant that we have. It's a 3-year grant that funds a firefighter. So I believe the first 2 years we're at 75%. I'm looking at Cindy to nod. And then the second year, or the third year, was 35% funded. So we are on our 3rd year, I believe, right? Yes, thank you. So that was part of that work that we did with the battalion chief and keeping that firefighter on that D20 list as
speaking of that, Jerry, one of the things I think, we talked about with D20 money is that it would give us the ability to have some matching funds for new types of grants. So as this one, heads into its third and final year, and we now have the revenue to pick up, keep that position funded permanently. I assume we're on the lookout for new opportunities like that, where it says, you hire somebody, I don't know, engage in some risk reduction or something like that. Right. We'll match it, or, you can get 75% funding for a couple of years. I assume we're on the lookout for those type of things now that we have, some revenue that would enable us to match those kind of grants.
Exactly. So we're applying for a lot of different grants. A lot of times they're very competitive. So sometimes we're successful, sometimes we aren't. You can see they've applied for, this other safer grant over here as well. We are just always trying to figure out how to do things better and cheaper and getting matching and all that. This one right here, for example, I forgot what NPP stands for, but it was a nuclear power plant or something, because we are in the zone of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. We were eligible for a radio replacement for emergency response to that sort of thing. So we fell under this umbrella. We were able to get new radios for the fire department, or at least a handful of them. I forgot how many there were. But those types of things we're always looking for. And we've been really successful too with like the Fire Safe Council grants, those kinds of things to do, the chipping program and stuff like that to keep our communities safer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Again, these will vary depending on what grants we have ongoing. And I think that's about it for that section. Mutual aid is its own program as well. Typically on mutual aid, we usually say we expect about, whatever that is, 158-ish in that neighborhood in expenses and a complementary revenue source. Many of the times the expenses and the revenues come in much higher because we go on a lot more calls for those different fires. So we will increase both the revenue and expense budget to cover that. So this is kind of the expense side of that. There are some fees that aren't in here, obviously, if, overhead and, there are some fees. So this isn't completely captured of everything, but it is what we are able to bill out for reimbursement.
The overhead portion that you're able to charge out, in those the expenses that are theoretically associated with that belong to like your department and others. Where are those reflected as a cost? Because let's say you get $200,000 of mutual aid revenue, but your fire department expenses were, $175,000. So where's the rest of it reflected?
Right. So like part of the admin cost is for my department for, to process the travel requests and the checks and all those things. That isn't allocated back into this department, but we do claim it and receive revenue for it. So it's a little bit shifted. This isn't comprehensive of all the expenses that tie out to the revenues, but it's a little bit complicated to try to capture all of those in one spot.
Right. I'm just wondering, so is that revenue differential reflected somewhere else in the general fund, or is it reflected on this page?
Generally, I think we have a little revenue section up here. We were looking up some numbers still before the meeting and weren't able to get those in, but normally we have like a little revenue of expected revenues kind of that matches up with the number of mutual aid incidents that we have.
All right.
Okay. there's no more questions, I'll move on. Okay. Next is Public Works Administration. So this is the engineering piece of the Public Works. So we, let's see, trying to remember what all is in here. Again, it reflects some kind of assumptions in the salary pieces. It has, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what all is in here. We did fund the city engineering standards update. So this is particularly important to developers and trying to kind of streamline some of those things. So that is helpful in that regard. So that was deemed to be a priority as well.
I think you might have had the asset management software there in computer maintenance and replacement.
Thank you, that's what that was. So we, as you know, talked about the asset management software previously. That is funded through one of the impact fee funds. We expect that that won't really come on board to be costing us for an annual maintenance until the second year of a budget. We expect that somewhere in the $30,000-ish range. So that is included in starting this second year here. That will be super helpful though to a lot of different departments. So we're really looking forward to that, getting that one going. Is there any questions on Public Works? The next one is Public Works Operations. So this one includes, we have a couple of staff members that are dedicated to this department where their salary comes through here. This also covers some of those kind of catch-all things for operations. Before we had streets and parks and transit, and we had big grouping of departments where we take, oh, well, the office expenses, you know, it's 1/5 for you, 1/5 for you, you know, and it was pretty complicated administratively. So a while back, we created this particular department. It would kind of catch all of those, and then part of this budget is allocated to those. It's a little bit simpler of a process. So in this budget, we do have like the downtown street trees, that program is in here, and some other things like radio replacement. So we do have, Public Works has radio equipment at the 3 repeaters in town that does need to be replaced. Each of those are specific to the department, like a skid steer loader. This is a really versatile and important piece of equipment. We don't have one. We could use it for a lot of different things. I think we have to rent one in instances, which is much more expensive. So this should be a great help to our Public Works divisions. And the same with this boom lift. We just don't have one. We have to rent one many times, and so we could use it for a lot of different things. So we were able to get those into the current year's budget. And then there is this amount that we're contributing as a one-time contribution to the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund, again, to fund those future expenses. Is there any questions on Public Works operations? And then parks. So parks, we have quite a bit of deferred maintenance that have been kind of building up, and we haven't been able to allocate funds to really get to all of that. So we are trying to get there now. So there is some funding in here for that vegetation management in the creek downtown. 150,000 for parks repair and replacement that would repair, you know, park benches, barbecue areas, some of those things that are just getting worn down and broken and need to be replaced, and we just haven't had the funding for them. Also some funds in here to replace a turf mower, to maintain some of the parking lots. Paloma Park parking lot, for example, is pretty torn up, and so we need to get that replaced and cleaned up. And then again, some contributions for the one-time contributions for the vehicle and equipment maintenance. And then we do have ongoing contributions to a couple of the lighting and landscape districts, so De Anza and Las Lomas. The city does pay a portion of the trails and stuff in each of those districts. The city also did agree to pay for half of the cost of the parks in Apple Valley. However, the developer initially contributed a significant amount to that, and we're still kind of using those funds for that contributions for Apple Valley. Is there any questions on the parks? And that concludes my presentation for today. I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Jerry, in general, though, this is part 1 of 2 for general fund. And then there were a couple of items that I thought we, didn't get to in some previous meetings that we were going to put on a subsequent meeting. Right. But that's not today. Would that be on next week or on the final one?
We'll kind of go through the rest of the departments next week. And then there were a couple we didn't get to, wastewater and the streets department and the community facilities district are the 3 that we haven't touched yet. I did want to ask you too about the law enforcement impact fee fund. We had brought that to you a couple of weeks ago. After that, we had determined that the new repeater that the police department is using in Templeton needs a $100,000 generator up there, and we are able to use those impact fee funds for that purchase, but it wasn't on the list when we brought it to you. So I just wanted to check in if you'd like me to bring that back to you next week so you can see that on there and look that over, or if you're fine with it with the verbal acknowledgement, or what your preference is.
You're just changing the funding source, right? Because it was already on one of the things we reviewed, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine as long as we all understand, that you're making that change. And does, by switching the funding source that we're no longer using, is that going to be impacted in any way in the sense that you got another $100,000 to spend
right.
out of the original funding source now?
Right, it was in the D20 list, I think. So we are able to use that money for other things on that list that we saw today.
Okay. And that's already been incorporated into the list we saw today. And was you added in a little bit to a couple of items? Okay, got it. Then
what about, didn't we miss the sewer fund last week?
Yes, you're right. So
wastewater, yeah.
We'll have that one, and then the streets gas tax fund, and then the community facilities district fund. So those 3 funds in addition to the general fund piece.
And is that our final meeting then?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And then
because I've lost track of how many meetings we've been in so far.
Right. Yes, this is 5 of 6 or okay. 17 of the 20. So we have, let's see, 17, and we have 2 more, 18 of 20. So we have two more meetings left, one finance committee and then the council meeting.
Got it. Right.
I have one question. If we can back up, if you can go to page 32.
Okay. Well, Gregor, you're our member of the public. You have had any questions? I'm sorry, Mark. I was going to just see if we have any public comment on any of this.
And then, before Mark speaks, no, I'm very interested in what you're doing here. Just get a background, basic background. But yeah, no, I think it's great.
Cool. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, on page 32, if you could, Jerry, there was just some numbers that it really made a jump and then back down, and I was just curious. It's on the mutual aid.
Ooh. Oh, mutual aid, I'm sorry.
Yeah, 32. You're all the way down to 15, 16.
Oh, this 32.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, there you go. So it went. So we had 231, 186 was the actual, then budgeted 828, estimated 821. Then it dropped way back down to 158. So I'm just curious what happened in those two columns there that is such a significant change.
Great question. So we had anticipated this would be more like this. But what actually happened during the current year 2021 is we went on a lot of different mutual aid incident responses. So this ended up being a huge number, much bigger than we would expect on a kind of a standard year. So we bumped up both the budget for the revenue and the expense at the same time to kind of accommodate for this huge expense. The revenue piece that we looked at last week, I guess, is greater as well. So both of those pieces jumped up. So I know it does look really weird, but that's just to kind of adjust for the level of activity for this year. It was a really high year.
So it's just an anomaly. The 158 or 186, the other numbers are more typical of what we would see.
Yeah, we kind of keep them like that at kind of a mild range. If I looked over history, we're probably a little bit more than that on average, just because we've been having a lot of fires, you know.
That's what I was going to say. It was more fire mutual aid than police.
Right, yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Vast majority
it's mostly fire mutual aid.
Most of it is fire.
Mark, yeah, Mark, I wouldn't think of it so much as an anomaly as just the nature of this function. And, you know, it can be a high number of incidents, or it can be a couple of really big incidents where we continually send out teams for weeks on end. And Jerry, I don't know what like the biggest year we've had, but I imagine we've had years that are well over $1 million in this category, maybe even $2 million on a particular year where you suddenly have real long incident or incident after incident.
Okay.
Right. Good point.
We're always hoping for those 158 numbers, though. Those are the good years.
Yeah. For everybody.
Exactly.
All righty. Okay. Does anybody else have any other comments for the good of the cause? Or Jerry or Rochelle, do you have any parting comments? Anything that we need to think about, know about before next week?
No, we'll look forward to our last meeting, and I want to thank everybody too for all your input and your review and your expertise over this time. I know it's a lot of dedication to have all these 6 meetings, and I certainly appreciate all of your time.
Yeah, this committee takes a lot of time over a more narrow window than other committees, so it doesn't, but then in between time, it doesn't take as much time as other committees. So.
Right.
So, well, thank you all again. And thank you, Jerry and Cindy and Rochelle. And we will see you all again one more time next week.
Right.
All right.
Thank you all. Appreciate